Hello, and welcome to God and Film, the podcast where an atheist and a Christian get together to discuss the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find parallels to the Gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm librarian and double-dealing purveyor of artifacts, Julia Hall,
And I'm media coordinator and hardened rebel insurgent, Giles Goff.
and today we're continuing season 8 of Giles's lockdown project that got out of hand with Andor, the 2022 Star Wars series, which sets the scenes of the early stages of the Galactic Civil War, or the Rebellion, leading up to the theft of the Death Star plans in the film Rogue One. We'll be discussing how biblical baddies like Herodias and Delilah may have influenced a whole genre of female villains in modern day media. How can two sides fight each other even if they believe the same things? And answering the important question, when is it okay for Christians to rebel against the government? Giles, how did you feel about watching Andor?
This is so weird.
It's
I'm a
a
guest co-host on my own show.
like a
It's,
Freaky Friday
yeah,
situation.
it's like a little alternate universe thing. I love it. Anyway, okay. I love Andor. I've said before in the past that, as you know, I'm a big Star Trek fan. So
Hmm.
when I come into Star Wars, I'm like, okay, this isn't my fandom. Be respectful, wipe your feet, but it's not your jam. But Andor made me into a hard and fast Star Wars fan. I absolutely loved this show. Here's the thing, right? I did try watching it when it came out, but it was so painfully slow to get started.
Hmm.
There's those first three episodes before Luthen and Andor actually meet, and God bless them, those could definitely have been just two episodes. You could have got to that point a lot quicker. And it's when he starts actually working for Luthen, that's when it starts to get interesting.
Hmm.
But from that point on, I'm absolutely hooked, and I kind of devoured the two seasons very quickly, and then felt utterly bereft by the end
Yeah.
of it. I watched Rogue One when it came out, and now I'm watching it again, and it feels like the last vestiges, the last scraps of a
Hmm.
sequel for a show that I absolutely adored. Which, when I watched it at the time, I was like, eh.
I always consider personally for me Rogue One to be the best Star Wars film
Was a-
because Andor especially for me is what I love about Star Wars. You can keep your space wizards. They're fine every now and then, but what really hooks me with the Star Wars universe is the people on the ground, the rebellion, the people who don't have the force to call upon when they need it, who have to get there through grit and sweat and sacrifice to do it. I like my sci-fi to be quite low, and so Andor just really scratches like all of the itches that I need from a Star Wars franchise.
What's interesting about it is when you position your audience in the position of just the ordinary kind of guy on the street, the Jedi look that much more impressive. Do you remember in I
Hmm.
think it's the season one finale of Mandalorian, where Luke Skywalker turns up and it's off screen and he just kind of cuts through all those dark
Yeah.
troopers like a hot knife through butter. And it was like, damn, this guy in black is a total screaming badass. But you don't see that when you're normally following Luke's journey from like
Yes.
blue-eyed, blonde-haired Nazi poster boy to absolute guy who destroys the Empire.
The scene in Rogue One where Vader comes down the corridor to get the that's like I think is the other side of that coin.
Yeah,
That scene alone I think is possibly the best scene in all of Star Wars in my humble opinion.
yeah.
Chef's kiss. No crumbs left.
Sometimes you are so Gen Z, it hurts.
Yeah, I mean, I technically am Gen Z mechanically, but I feel that every now and then I can dip over into the millennial side and be welcomed as an old friend.
Yeah, we'll happily have you in the club.
So I believe in this in the spirit of Freaky Friday, it's you who has some facts for me today.
We do. We have some Jazz facts.
Woo,
Now,
jazz facts.
I know how seriously you take the Julius facts, and the way you put it was, I might start on IMDb, but I never finished there. So I took that the same thing. I used that as the starting point, and then found some other interesting bits that you might like. Okay,
I'm
so
ready.
do you notice any particular inspiration for the character of Cassian Andor?
From like Star Wars media or just
No,
kind of in
from
general?
history.
Not that I could think of
Okay.
quickly.
So Benjamin Caron, I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. If I got it wrong, Ben, please just get in touch. Was one of the directors. He directed three episodes of the first series of Andor, and he said that Tony Gilroy was like, What was Che Guevara like before he became Che Guevara? So it was about how this individual who was a bit lost and just trying to make a quick buck could start believing in something bigger than himself. And that would be the start of the rebellion. And it's quite fascinating when you look at it. Like, if you think of it on the Han
Mm,
Solo front, the I don't stick my neck out for nobody, going through from that to the flying the Millennium Falcon in at the last minute to save them.
mm,
It's that fascinating thing of seeing a hardened anti-hero become a believer in something. That line that Luthen has, look, they're going to hang us anyway. We might as well make it worthwhile,
hmm.
effectively, was a really good one. And Tony Gilroy uses this brilliant sort of food metaphor. As again, as Ben Caron said, Tony also talks a lot about the idea of protein in regards to storytelling. Sugar might give you a big rush, but afterwards it doesn't leave you feeling satisfied. Whereas if you're eating protein, you may not get an instant high, but you're going to get something deeper and richer if you've invested the time. And I think that is
I love that.
probably the best way to describe Andor is like,
Yeah.
get your protein in you,
Get,
you
get,
know?
get your protein in,
It'll,
get your protein bars.
it'll keep you going, you know?
Yeah.
Somebody also described Andor as the Deep Space Nine of Star Wars, and that was kind of made me think, oh, okay, maybe I need to give this show another try. Now, as you might know, Julie, we have some quirks on this show. Olivia Colman is referred to as our Livy
Hmm.
because in the minds we like to think that she's somehow related to Phil somewhere. Shout out to my boy Phil. If you're listening to this Star Wars episode, I really hope you enjoy it. If not, why not? But there we go. It's
What are you
another time.
doing?
Yeah, what are you doing? Denise Goff, as you will remember from the Under the Banner of Heaven episode, is always referred to as Cousin Denise on this
Hmm.
one. Okay, there are so few Goffs in the world. We really need to make the most of the ones that. And she's from Ireland. My family from Ireland, so it's not out of the
It's
realms of
not,
possibility that we're
yeah.
related. Anyway, you'll like this because Denise Goff revealed she researched female psychopaths in order to play Dedra Meero.
Oh, amazing.
She said, I did a lot of research on female psychopathy. Apparently, females who are psychopaths are less likely to murder because they're more likely to enlist people to do it for them, which makes sense to me because she gets Cyril to do things. And I love it because somebody described Cyril and Dedra as fascist Barbie and Ken.
Yes. That whole are they boyfriend and girlfriend? Are they roommates? I don't I
Dedra is like, how can I person today? That seems to be her thing. And Cyril is so needy. He's so like, can I be part of something that's important and everybody will love me? And it's
I know
okay
you
if it's
shouldn't feel
evil.
bad for Cyril, but
Hmm.
I feel bad for Cyril.
I do not feel bad for Cyril. There is a very simple rule that we have, okay? Do not simp for fascists. I,
Oh,
I'm
like
I'm trying to put it in the most Gen Z way I can for you.
we don't simp for fascists, but I do wonder if he'd ended up on the other side of the fence, as it were, under say someone like Luthen, whether he would have been just as
Well,
zealous.
I think we can establish that what this show revealed to us was that the true villain of the Star Wars universe is Cyril's mother
Yes.
because she is exhausting.
Darth Vader ain't got nothing on this lady, okay? He wasn't trying to get the rebel plans in that corridor scene. He was trying to get away from her. Like that's like, so let me through.
Do you know what? It is interesting what you say about could Cyril have been turned at any point? Could Cyril have been different? And I think the way he reacts to, if I remember rightly, the way he sort of realizes he's been played during the
Mm,
Gorman massacre,
yeah.
and he is filled with such passionate intensity. Coming back
Mm,
to another show we've talked about recently, the whole Saul Paul thing in Testament, you sort of feel like Cyril could be a person like that.
yeah. There's capacity there.
Mhm.
It's it's just almost a case of wrong place, wrong time,
Yeah.
I think, for Cyril, which I think is partly why I want to feel a little bit sorry for him, even though I shouldn't feel
Yeah.
sorry for him at all.
Yeah.
Because he
Definitely.
he really is picked up by the Empire and used by the Empire or Daedra, and then dropped really when it's
Yeah.
convenient.
Sticking again with Benjamin Karen, he told us that he was lucky enough to be behind the camera for Denise Goff's first day on set as Dedra. And he said she had this monologue that was half a page long. And as a professional, Denise had prepared the night before. But unfortunately, when she stepped on set, all the words just vanished. And so we just cut. And I said, we're going to leave it and we'll come back. And this was something that I encountered when working on Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch. He had these huge, long monologues, and early on, I remember him struggling with lots and lots of words. And somebody said, you've just got to hit this at pace. You've got to hit this really hard. And I remember saying to Denise that the only way through this is pace. So she went away for a couple of days, and I think she also spoke to Jodie Whittaker, who played the Doctor in Doctor Who, and she said exactly the same thing about learning it fast and just hitting it. And when Denise came back to set, we had one of those scenes in the Politburo with Anton Lesser. She had this takedown on one of the other characters, and she hit it with such force to prove herself to Anton Lesser's character. She just nailed it. And at the end of that whole monologue, the entire floor applauded because it was amazing. Suddenly, Dedra had arrived. And I love that.
That's
it's
awesome.
Like, if
Yeah.
you're going to say something that's absolute techno-babbly nonsense, just say it really fast and with tons of energy. And that's got me through pretty much every Shakespeare production ever, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
As I said, this is my Star Wars.
Yeah.
I've talked about that frustration of, you finally made a Star Wars that I really not just like, but love, and now it's gone. And if you can believe it, the show was originally planned for a 5-season run. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because the first season takes place in the space of like a year. Tony Gilroy and Diego Luna, who plays Cassian Andor, essentially sat down and had this realization of like, we can't do this. I will get older, people start to die off, and this is effectively still all a prequel series. I still have to look a certain way when I walk off this, and it was wildly expensive. It was taking about like 2 years of post-production time, I believe, to get things running. So that's why season 2 has this thing where there'll be a year apart between each episode. There'll be there's all the what's it BB1 and
BBY. So
BBY. You explain this nonsense to people.
So you have BBY and you have ABY. So much like in real human life, we have BC, before Christ, and AD, which is Anno Domini.
Yeah.
So you have before Jesus and after Jesus. Star Wars' Jesus is the Battle of Yavin, which is when the Death Star gets blown up in A New Hope. So you have before Battle of Yavin and you have after Battle of Yavin. So that's where that's your BBY and your ABY. Yeah.
And I love that they just didn't bother to explain that. They're just like, BBY4. You figure it out. I've got stuff to do.
Yeah, it doesn't hold your hand. If you're not used to some of the Star Wars lingo, you kind of have to get used to it real quick.
Absolutely. So this decision was made due to lengthy production time and the necessary post-production time that made each season's production schedule almost 2 years. While season 1's events took place over a few months, season 2 spanned 4 years and is shown in 4 3-episode blocks with a year of time passing between the blocks. And did you know the Gorman language, the Gorman Massacre was based on I think it's a 1966 film called The Battle of Algiers. And obviously the Gorman and Gore and Gorman is all quite inspired by the French and the French resistance and the rest of it.
It really gave me 1940s occupied Paris.
100%.
From the get-go, which I adored.
Completely intentional that. And they actually created an entire language that was made to sound a bit like French, but not French. It is a completely made up language.
It's like if French and German like had a baby and then sent it into space.
Apparently the creators of it say that after a certain point of creating it, they would just chat to each other in the Gorman language, and it is they think it's on a par with Esperanto.
That's amazing. I would love to be the kind of person that can just like absorb languages. So cool. Linguists are so cool.
So there we go. And those are my facts.
Oh, that was awesome. In the spirit of it being Freaky Friday, we'll continue. So my next job now, after hearing those lovely facts, is to introduce our special guest, or rather allow our special guest to introduce himself.
I'm James Rose. I'm a freelance film writer or film journalist. I do quite varied work, and it mostly centres around horror films and horror television. and also doing more increasingly things like this, lots of podcast guest appearances talking about the things that I really enjoy.
James, thank you so much for being back on the show. You did such an amazing job talking about The Mandalorian. We have almost the exact opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to the Star Wars universe, when it comes to Andor. So let's get right into it. How did Andor come about?
In November 2017, Disney's CEO Bob Iger announced that Disney was going to start working on a whole variety of potential Star Wars TV series. Some were going to be sort of spin-offs and some were going to be adjacent. One of them that was announced was a possibility of doing something in relation to Rogue One, which is the Star Wars prequel film. It was indicated that it would be sort of like a spy thriller, so perhaps something a little bit different to what you're used to in the Star Wars universe, but it would definitely centre upon Cassian Andor and his experiences prior to the narrative of Rogue One. When Tony Gilroy, who's credited as the co-writer of Rogue One, heard about this, he had a conversation with the actor that played Andor, Diego Luna, and they had a long conversation about how the series could play out, and ended up with Gilroy writing to Lucasfilm's president, Kathleen Kennedy, and basically outlined what he wanted to do with the series instead of what Disney wanted to do with the series. And in the end, he was, based on this letter and that content, from what I understand, he was then offered the role as series showrunner, which he accepted. And I think there's something quite interesting about it in that it's a prequel. We already know the ending.
Yeah.
We know what's going to happen to Cassian because we've all seen Rogue One. But it's... I sort of did a little bit of research and I found this really, really nice quote from him, which I think is worth reading out. Diego Luna said, "It's nice to go into a story of which you already know the ending. Now you can flesh out all the nuances and all the layers. I think it's fun to do something that isn't about getting to the end. It's actually about delaying it." And that, I think, is a fantastic way of dealing with it. We know what's going to happen to Cassian.
Yeah.
And that brings such a sadness to what we watch in season 1 and season 2 of Andor. So that's how it came about, through these sort of strange movements and manipulations within the wider sort of conglomerate of Disney, but also on the production level, with cast and crew having such investment in the production that they want to shepherd that series in a way that they feel is most respectful to that character, ultimately.
What would you say the public response to Andor has been like?
According to various sources, Andor generated over $300 million in global streaming for Disney Plus.
Right.
And that covers from its debut in September 2022 to the end of 2024. Given that, in terms of fan response or audience response, it surpasses the performance of most other Star Wars television spin-offs.
This show feels like it is purpose-built for people like you, who grew up with the franchise, and I think there's a good argument to make that the first Star Wars film is family entertainment, where you're appealing to kids as much as to adults. This is like, okay, you've grown up, you've seen all things, you've become entirely disillusioned with the rest of the world, have some Star Wars.
That is exactly the best way of describing it, I think. It is probably one of the most adult Star Wars series ever. What I said earlier about it being a spy thriller, or what Bob Iger suggested it would be, that encapsulates it, because I'm not sure Andor is Star Wars as most audience would perceive it. It's something massively different. It's a lot darker and it's a lot slower. It's very politically motivated, and I think the violence in it, with which there is very, very little, when it happens, is extreme. I think there are two shocking things in it. One involves the plaza scene in Gorman, and the other is Cyril's response when he finally finds Cassian. And the violence that ensues between them is brutal.
It's visceral, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unpleasant to watch, because you can see in that performance and in that sort of fight coordination the sheer anger of Cyril and the sheer anger of the Empire against a rebel. and it's horrendous to see the hero, the protagonist, being treated in such a horrendous way. But I think there's a caveat to that, because at the end of that horrendously brutal sequence, there is a moment where Cyril stops, and Cyril realizes the full extent of what he's done. And I'm not sure it's redemption for him, but there is something about the intensity of the violence against the intensity of Cyril's moment that is not Star Wars. It is something else. And yeah, it's got stormtroopers in, and yeah, it's got the Empire in, and it's got A-Wings in, and things like that flying around. But it just doesn't feel like Star Wars. It feels like, if you're going to be honest, a political commentary of the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's brutal. And it's also, if that's what it is, and that's how it can be read, it gives Star Wars a whole new life and a whole new way of dealing with its fans, dealing with culture, and dealing with itself to make itself relevant to contemporary audiences.
Do you know what? It's fascinating you mentioned that. That leads to my next point. I saw a meme recently that had a face of Luke Skywalker's face in it, and the caption was just like, I don't see why we have to have spin-offs about characters that weren't even in Andor in the first place. So I guess what I'm asking is, how do you think Andor might change the way people feel about Star Wars?
I think it certainly says it can deal with mature themes. And you said it right at the beginning, that it's kind of built for our generation. We've grown up and we've got adult concerns, adult sort of situations surrounding us. And Andor tries to use Star Wars to talk about them in a political sort of context. Yeah. It's sort of saying, on one end of the spectrum, you can have crazy, silly Star Wars and fan service Star Wars and all of the things that Lucas wanted Star Wars to be. But we've also grown up and the world's getting to be quite a dark place. And perhaps Star Wars can help us, and many other products like Superman, or it's like James Gunn's intentions for the DC universe. So I think we can see Star Wars being, instead of this very vast money-making entity for Disney and this fantastic entertainment escapism entity for the audience, it can also say, let's be serious about this and let's look at what's going on, and let's use these characters, these very tragic characters, to talk about ourselves and offer hope, which is what Star Wars is all about, isn't it? As Jin keeps saying, rebellions are built on hope. And that's not to advocate rebellion, but she's saying there's always hope. There's always the chance to change. There's always a chance for us to come together and be kind, be considerate, share with each other, help each other. All of those sort of values that Lucas invested into the original Star Wars.
Absolutely. I don't think we can get any better than that. Thank you so much, James, for talking so eloquently about Andor. I really appreciate it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. It's been great.
Hey guys, it's Editing Charles here. As usual, Julia goes hard on the research. So much so that there's actually too much to fit into this episode. So if you want to hear the full thing, go to www.patreon.com/godinfilmpodcast and sign up to our Bishop Waller-Bridge tier. There you can also listen to our special bonus episode on Bruce Springsteen. Here's a clip. And if money is a bit tight, you can also help us out by leaving us a 5-star review on Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Podbean or Spotify. It really helps people to find the God in Film podcast. And now, back to the show. So, Julia, that was James Rose. What do you think?
Again, it all comes back to Cyril. All comes back, and he's totally right. That whole interaction is also extra crazy to me because Cassian has no clue who this guy is. Cassian's like, who is this guy? Cyril's like, you ruined my whole life. I hate you. And he's like, I don't even know who you are.
It's like an inversion of the Drax and Thanos bit of like, you murdered my entire family. Who are you again?
I don't even know who you are.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. James is always such a good one to talk to because you do get the feeling you are talking to like a day one Star Wars fan, somebody whose Star Wars fandom precedes my literal existence. That's quite something.
I suppose now it is time for Finding the Faith in the Film.
Ba, 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 ba.
Woo! So this is very weird, but
Mhm.
I know we've talked a little bit about Dedra Meero, and I want to kind of return back to her.
Okay.
Hear me out. I'm going to say something that might be a little bit controversial, but I'm gonna explain myself.
Gosh,
So
us being controversial on this show,
I
never.
know, right? It's crazy. When we first get introduced to Dedra Meero, or rather, when I was first introduced to Dedra Meero, I almost kind of wanted to root for her, even
Mm,
though you really shouldn't.
yeah.
And this is partly why I really love this character because the way that she's been written kind of leads into that.
Hmm.
So we see that Daedra is shown from the get-go to be a woman in a man's world, right?
Yeah.
She's surrounded by all these male officers who are incompetent or arrogant or both, and she's having to work twice as hard to get half as far,
Hmm.
despite the fact that she's shown to have this really superior drive and intellect.
Yeah.
So when other officers like Blevin shut her out from her Ferrex inquiries, she doesn't get mad, she gets even.
Yeah.
So it's satisfying to eventually see her take them down a peg or three at a board meeting and rattle off these massive monologues about how rubbish everyone is, right? And she impresses her superiors, so like Partagaz and even Director Krennic, and we feel like it's what she deserves.
Yeah.
It's the sort of the narrative of this woman gaining agency and the upper hand over her male colleagues, and also her actually evil mother-in-law.
Yeah. That moment where she says to Cyril's mum, Cyril will come to see you these times, and if you talk to him in this way, then that will not happen. And this, I was like, oh,
And again, you're
I
like,
had a bit of a wobble then, if I was honest, because that's
yeah,
talk like there's an entire genre of films these days where it is about getting problematic parents to apologize for the way they
yes.
treated you growing up.
It's bad when like the only person who can take down Cyril's mom is a fascist. I'm just saying. But we're sat there, we're rooting for her because we, especially I think for some of us, we know what that's like to have this overbearing in-law that, is controlling and toxic, right?
Hmm.
So, and this narrative again of her having this upper hand and this agency is powerful enough that you're forgetting sometimes that you're rooting for another fascist in a whole building of fascists, right? But what does this actually have to do with the Bible? Where's the link there? So I'm going to take us back to sort of Old Testament, a little bit of Apocrypha. We're kind of going to go back into the mists of Bible time.
Hang on, those are two different things. Apocrypha and Old Testament. You gotta pick one.
Yeah, but I mean, mostly Old Testament with like a sprinkle of apocryphal seasoning. Is that allowed?
It is, yes, but again, it's how can I put it? You've got the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Apocrypha, which is the Testament.
It's just the deleted scenes, you
So
know?
the lads from the Bible Project, which is a fantastic podcast, I learned from them that there's another name for it. It's the Deuterocanon, as
Oh,
in
okay.
as in like another canon of books that is secondary. So now, like, listen, don't show this to the people who are just coming through the door. This is not something you give to new Christians,
Mhm.
but it has some interesting stuff in, and study it when you're ready for it, basically.
Yeah, sort of as a disclaimer, I suppose. So
Yeah.
obviously when I'm looking at the Bible, I look at it almost in as a group of a lot of different stories all kind of woven together. And for me, it's obviously less about the faith aspect being an atheist. So
Mhm. So I love the fact that we're talking about the Apocrypha and Star Wars because how can I put this? There are very live debates in the Star Wars world about what is canon and what is not
oh
canon.
yeah,
In many
yeah,
ways, I feel like the Apocrypha is the forerunner to this, the warm up to the kind of arguments that
yeah,
you would have in this.
yeah,
Because while many Catholics treat the Apocrypha as canon, Protestants don't. So
yeah.
that's your sort of split point, if that helps for
Yeah,
you.
think of it for the Star Wars fans and less of the Bible fans. Think of it as like legends and the Disney canon. The stories that I'm looking at in the Bible, in the Old Testament at least,
Hmm.
are ones about sort of dubious biblical ladies. So,
Love
like the
them.
story of Delilah. So
Yeah.
Delilah is bribed basically to find out her lover Samson's weakness, which
Yeah.
she does. by cutting his hair.
Mhm.
And then in some stories, she dobs him in to his enemies. In other stories, she cuts his hair herself while he sleeps.
Right.
Another story we could look at is the story of Herodias. So I think sometimes she's not named in the Bible, but in this instance, when I say Herodias, I mean the wife of Herod Antipas and the mother of Salome or Salome.
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 So if we're talking about Herodias, then we are talking New Testament then, aren't we?
You will know much better than I will. I may have gotten my testaments mixed up. Yes, of course, because
Work it through,
so work it
finish the
through.
thought.
I spent a lot of time like very close up in this, and sometimes you miss the wood for the trees. So we're looking at Old Testament and we're looking at New Testament
Yeah.
and we're looking at Apocrypha. We're looking all over.
Excellent.
Um,
Excellent.
But the story of Herodias is she essentially manipulates her husband and arguably her daughter Salome into murdering John the Baptist. She asks Salome to perform a dance for Herod Antipas, and when he is pleased with this dance, he says that he'll basically give her whatever she asks for. And Salome asks for the head of John the Baptist, as one does. And so he is, they're murdered. So these women and other women, so Judith, who is our apocryphal lady, and Jael, went on to become poster women of a Renaissance art trend called Power of Women, or Webermacht.
I get the impression that when they were coming up with Power of Women, that wasn't necessarily the yay, happy girl power thing that we...
Yes, yeah, you'd be right. So these pieces of art were these sort of dramatic tableaus of these kind of key pieces in the story. So, Delilah cutting Samson's hair, Salome being presented with the head of John the Baptist, and Judith cutting off the head of Holofernes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But you are right; these images weren't to sort of be like, "Yay, women!" They're saying, "Watch out, boys! If you fall from the path, if you stray, if you give into temptation or carelessness, the ladies are going to get the upper hand, and your head's going to get chopped off.
Yeah.
Watch out."
That's feminism for you.
Feminism.
You let them vote, and before you know it, they are going to be decapitating people left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
To be absolutely clear, that was satire then, and I don't want anybody like clipping me at exactly the wrong point there.
Yeah, make sure that we don't get cancelled. We don't get Giles cancelled on Twitter. But the apocryphal lady I was talking about, Judith, is a really good example of this. So Judith was a Jewish widow.
Okay.
That was her occupation. But there was a general called Holofernes who was essentially setting up to sack and destroy her city. So under cover of night, she sneaks into his tent and she decapitates him. Which honestly I think is fair enough if this guy's going to come and destroy a whole city for probably no reason.
So that has echoes of JL and the tent peg, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Did you research her? Do you want to tell people about her?
I only know that obviously there was Jael and the tent peg. Speaking as girl to my girl Jael, I can understand wanting to drive a tent peg through a guy's head.
Yeah.
Understandable. Yeah.
So for those who don't know, Jael comes from the book of Judges. She kills Sisera, the commander of the Canaanite army, in order to help the Israelites. He comes into her tent, which again is not on,
Not common.
And he's hiding out there. And in a tent, she hammered a tent peg through his temple while he slept, fulfilling a prophecy by Deborah. Deborah was one of the judge that was running Israel at the time, and securing a period of peace for the Israelites.
Good jail. But this is fair enough kind of acts of resistance against arguably tyrannical men.
Yeah.
And as the Renaissance period kind of goes on, you get, especially in Judith's case, in the early Renaissance, she's kind of this defender against tyranny. There's a really famous sculpture by Donatello that kind of portrays her as that. But as you kind of come through the Renaissance, she becomes a sort of seducer assassin who kind of uses the sort of feminine wiles and to tempt Holofernes with alcohol and kind of get him into a position where she can then decapitate him. Yeah. But if we look at these kinds of women, we might describe them using a modern day slang of a girl boss. So in the modern
Dedra is your fascist girl boss then, yeah?
She's absolutely a girl boss. So to explain the slang, I would define girl boss as a sort of semi-problematic woman. They're usually portrayed with very feminist ideals who sort of carry out these ruthless schemes at the expense of the people around them, and they usually exist in male-dominated fields. So Miranda Priestley from Devil Wears Prada, up there. Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, very much in that kind of slot. Some people might disagree with me, but Daenerys Targaryen, I think, really falls into that girl boss category.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because coming back to that sort of Devil Wears Prada sort of thing, that these women have been able to infiltrate male-dominated
Mm,
spaces, and in
yeah,
some cases they've had to do it by becoming one of the boys, if you like.
yeah,
And in order to get themselves into that particular in-group, they've had to denigrate other women. They've had to sort of
yes,
fall into like the effectively, I think they call it the cool girl archetype, the
hmm,
I'm not like other girls sort of thing.
yes,
And you see this particularly in like political parties. And I think somebody pointed out that the reason why there tends to be more sort of female leaders in the Conservative Party is that women in the Conservative Party are less likely to rock the boat. They're more likely
yeah,
to kind of emulate those kind of dominator activities that you see often being done by men in that party.
hmm.
Whereas traditionally women in the Labour Party have been a bit more subversive.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But you kind of get the idea of sort of characters that I mean when I talk about a girl boss.
Yeah.
And at its worst, the girl boss is still a negative stereotype that kind of comes from this Renaissance power of woman trend. But when it's translated onto a fully fleshed out and emotionally complex role like Daedra, we get this fantastic character who really falls under that core mantra of Gaslight Gatekeep Girlboss.
Hang on. Let's take Gaslight Gatekeep
Gatekeep
Girlboss.
Girlboss.
I love learning about a new trope. You tell me what this is, because I'm fascinated.
I don't know specifically from where in the internet this Gaslight Gatekeep Girlboss kind of
Hmm.
spawned, but spawn it did. And it absolutely ties in with this idea of a girl boss. And Daedra absolutely does all these things. She gaslights Cyril to no end into helping her sort of orchestrate the genocide on Gorman. She will absolutely pit her own colleagues against each other. She'll throw them under the bus. She'll interrogate innocent people. She uses rebels and Imperials alike in bait for her schemes. She consistently uses gaslighting and manipulation as a tool. When we
Okay.
talk about gatekeeping, in a modern sense, gatekeeping is essentially keeping people away from things that you kind of like. You can gatekeep cultures, you can gatekeep fandoms. So you might find in the Star Wars fandom, especially, there are sort of people who go, oh, well, if you like the sequels and only the sequels, you're not a true Star Wars
Yeah.
fan, and they'll, but
Just because something isn't good doesn't mean it's not canon.
yeah, if that's what you love, that's fine. But to come back to Daedra, and her Gaslight Gatekeep Girl Boss mantra, she is completely that. But
Mhm.
as I mentioned earlier, we still kind of want her to succeed. We root for her. We feel sad a bit for her when she ultimately fails to her own hubris, just in the same way that we root and sympathize for some of these aforementioned biblical baddies, although none of them were fascists. So feel free to root for Judith and Jael as much as you like.
I was gonna say, dude, I don't think anyone's reading the Gospel of Matthew and Mark and going like, "Go on, Herodias,
Yeah.
get John the
Yeah.
Baptist's head, you absolute girl boss."
Some people might. It's questionable, possibly.
Some people might.
Essentially, we can understand that why we might root for Data in that sense, even though we really know that we shouldn't. And it's largely because of her gender and in the environment that she's in, she is kind of an underdog.
It's interesting because, again, we are positioned to empathize
Hmm.
with her because she is a woman, and women are so predominantly the focus of
Hmm.
prejudice in the workplace. And that's still very
Yeah,
much the case here, that we are inclined to sympathize with her, even though she's the
yeah,
worst, even though she's absolutely
yeah.
terrible.
And that's what I love about the character, not her, but the way that the character is written. It really makes you analyze your feelings about it. But speaking of underdogs, if we are going to call Deja an underdog, at least for the gender imbalance, um, Andor shows us a lot more underdogs, right? it shows us the rebels, and it shows us the beginnings of the stirrings of the Galactic Civil War, or the rebellion. So we see rebels like Saw Gerrera and Luthen Rael kind of before it becomes the fully fledged rebel alliance that we see in A New Hope, sort of under the guidance of Senators Mon Mothma and Bail Organa.
For me, I think all the films have focused on the rebel part of that, and this TV series showed me the alliance part of it, because these are not a uniform group, effectively. They are different groups of people coming together, that kind of fellow traveler aspect. They don't always agree with each other's methods, or they have different war aims, they have different overall goals, but they're coming together to sort of take down the Empire.
As you say, it's essentially these different cells. You've got Luthen Rael and Mon Mothma kind of working as one kind of cell. You've got Anto Krieger, who we don't meet, but we know of his fate later on. You've got Saw Gerrera and Maya Pei, and even sort of the Gorman front. They're not actually, at the beginning, some of them don't actually really work together that much. They argue just as much as they kind of pitch in.
Yeah.
The only thing that's sort of really keeping them together sometimes is the concept of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Which is something I'm going into Bible stuff now, but Jesus kind of talks about this in Mark chapter 9 verses 39 to 41, where he says, if he's not an enemy, he's an ally. Why, anyone just by giving you a cup of water in my name is on our side.
Just to clarify, is that the Message version?
Yes.
I knew that introducing you to that would pay dividends. I do know the phrase, I do know the meaning. I've just never heard it phrased quite like that before, and I love it.
That is the message version. But even this concept sometimes isn't actually enough to keep the rebels together. So I've mentioned Anto Krieger before. He is the rebel, and his cell essentially are sacrificed to the Empire by Luthen when they learn of Anto's plans, and they learn that the Empire knows about Anto's plans. They basically kind of let it happen. But don't feel bad about that, because Anto Krieger is a separatist. So although he is anti-Empire, he's not really Rebel Alliance material. So previously, the separatists, you'll remember from the prequel films, they once boasted members such as Asajj Ventress and Count Dooku. So although they hate the Empire, they aren't really a friend to what we would think of as Rebel Alliance later on. So even early doors, you can see the very different levels of what constitutes a rebel, all the way from Mon Mothma to neo-separatists who just kind of want their trade federations back. You know what I mean?
Hey guys, this is Giles and Julia from the future. I found a brilliant comparison to Luthen and Mon Mothma that we didn't have in the original episode, and it's so good I had to include it. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to an Instagram account now, which I know you're going to love. Okay, and it's by this comedian called Jeremy Alder, Alder, and he has this intermittent series called Christians Who Don't Suck, and that's where I learned some of the stuff about this. Okay, so I'm going to throw a name out to you. Have you heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. You're about to fall in love with somebody now, sweet. So just get ready, okay? So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a brilliant German pastor and theologian whose commitment to Jesus' teachings led him to resist fascism and pay the ultimate price for it. When Hitler first rose to power, most Christians went along with it, many even loudly supported him, but not Bonhoeffer. In 1933, 2 days after Hitler was installed as Chancellor, Bonhoeffer delivered a radio address in which he attacked Hitler and warned Germany against it slipping into an idolatrous cult of the Führer, who he argued might well turn out to be a Wehrführer, a misleader or a seducer. His broadcast was abruptly cut off, though it's unclear whether the new elective Nazi regime was responsible or not. He helped found something called the Confessing Church. Have you ever heard of that?
Nope, that's new. That's new as well.
So it was a Christian resistance movement that rejected Nazism. So for Bonhoeffer, following Jesus meant actually following Jesus and putting the lives of others before his own, especially those of his countrymen who were being taught to fear and despise. Bonhoeffer threw himself into the resistance movement and helped Jews escape Germany. There's this interesting point, actually. There was one point where he lived in London, and for a brief period, he lived in the United States. But while his friends urged him to stay and impact Germany from afar, he decided to return to Germany, knowing full well that it might cost him his life. He wrote in a letter to his friend, his American host, he shared his reasons for returning to Germany. I have had the time to think and pray about my situation and that of my nation, and to have God's will for me clarified. I made a mistake in coming to America. I must live through this difficult period of our national history with the Christian people of Germany. I will have no right to participate in the reconstruction of Christian life in Germany after the war if I do not share the trials of this time with my people. My brethren in the Confessing Synod wanted me to go. They may have been right in urging me to do so, but I was wrong in going. Such a decision each man must make for himself. Christians in Germany will face the terrible alternative of either willing the defeat of their nation in order that the Christian civilization may survive, or willing the victory of their nation and therefore destroying our civilization. I know which of these alternatives I must choose, but I cannot make that choice in security. So Bonhoeffer continued his relationship with the Confessing Church and joined the German resistance movement. He was forbidden to speak or write, but he was arrested in April 1943 for smuggling Jews into Switzerland, and he was actually killed in one of the concentration camps. He was executed there by the Nazis. So he is that big, glowing, kind of lightning rod, speaking truth to power, that kind of Mon Mothma kind of character.
Makes me think of the big speech she does in the Senate at the end of the series, which is a sort of
absolutely
final, this is it, calling out Emperor Palpatine right then and there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have as much info on this guy, but I just didn't have time to sort of get as much of it. And this is an Irish priest who was actually working in the Vatican at the time during Mussolini being in power, and he was called Irish Monsieur Hugh O'Flaherty, who was dubbed the Vatican Pimpernel due to his disguises when he left the safety of the Vatican state to arrange the safe exit of Jews from Rome.
We love that.
O'Flaherty was initially, at the start of the war, what he would do would be if there were soldiers who were missing in action, he would tour POW camps to see if he could spot any of them, find any of these people, and then find a way to get the information back to the families that their loved ones were alive, basically. But he carried on. He sort of recruited a network of other priests to help people, and he was responsible for saving 6,500 Allied soldiers and Jews.
Wow.
Again, his ability to evade the traps by the German Gestapo earned him the nickname the Scarlet Pimpernel of the Vatican. O'Flaherty survived the war and became the only visitor of the imprisoned SS boss Herbert Kappler, who had previously hunted for the Irish priest on the streets of Rome. Kappler eventually converted as a result. So
that's a film in itself.
Well,
Where's
apparently
this
there
movie?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. There was a film about him, and he was actually played by Gregory Peck in the film version, The Scarlet and the Black, and that was a 1983 film.
Yeah.
And there are many lesser-known monks and nuns who worked together to hide Jews and help them flee. Only a 1985 TV movie called The Assisi Underground tells their part of the story. So there's tons of others. There's Bishop von Galen, there's Mother Maria Skobotova, Pastor Andre Trumer in the village of Le Chambon. Then there's Corrie ten Boom, quite famously. There's even a guy called Martin Niemöller, who was he actually supported Hitler at the time, initially, until he was a self-described anti-Semite, and then he noticed that this Aryan belief that only the Aryans could be allowed into the priesthood and this sort of stuff would eventually wipe out Christianity, and he was imprisoned. He sort of changed his mind about a lot of things. He turns his back on it, and he was the one that wrote the poem First They Came. First they came from the communists. So even people who were in agreement with Hitler, who sort of changed their mind, would eventually turn their back on him and absolutely pay the price for it in some cases, and some of them would survive and the rest of it. And what I wanted to say was both forms of resistance, either illicit or explicit, are totally valid as far as I'm concerned. Dietrich Bonhoeffer effectively made himself a lightning rod of attention, and drew all that attention to him, standing up for what he believed in, and it eventually cost him his life. And that is completely valid. And also the people who are sneaking around
With the
in
little
order to
wig
save people's
collection.
lives, yeah, that's totally valid too. And that was the best comparison I could think of the Mon Mothma Luthian
Mm.
dynamic.
Yes, there's a lot of ways to resist. Not everybody has to go join the Gorman front immediately. Some people are watching and waiting and helping from the sidelines, kind of like, I've forgotten his name now, but Mon Mothma's assistant, who was a Lutheran plant the whole time, but obviously
Hmm.
he's not going to the front lines and yelling at Palpatine or shaking his fist at Darth Vader, but he's doing a lot of important work behind the scenes as well.
Absolutely.
It's almost like people who genuinely believe the same things will usually always get along unless there's something else in the mix, like power, that upskittles it, essentially,
Hmm.
which is kind of
Yeah.
what happens with the rebels to an extent, because at the moment they're still disparate. They still don't really have a leader. They're fighting each other, I think, not completely for the title of leader, but at least for their own version of what rebellion should look like to kind of be at the forefront.
Well, there's also lives at stake, isn't there? Like,
Yes, yeah.
nobody wants to be the guy leading the cannon fodder division,
Hmm.
and because existing prejudices can lead into these things, that can you don't know you need to know that if somebody is sending you into battle,
Yeah,
that you need to know that they're not sending you to die because they want you out of the way.
yeah. And even at the time of Jesus, his followers didn't always get along. I mean, they weren't killing each other in the streets, but they argue plenty of times. More
Yes.
than once, they are bickering with each other about who's the best, who gets to be Jesus's best mate. In Mark 9, when he was safe at home, this is he being Jesus, he asked them, the disciples, what were you discussing on the road? The silence was deafening. They had been arguing with one another over who among them was greatest. The Last Supper in Luke 22, when Jesus tells them that one of them is going to go rogue and betray him, they immediately start pointing fingers at each other.
Mhm.
They immediately, quote, within minutes, they were bickering over who of them would end up the greatest. Peter's like, I would go to jail for you, Jesus. I would die for you, Jesus. And Jesus is like, you're going to deny me 3 times? Check it. So
This adds credence to the belief that Jesus was essentially their youth leader and all the apostles were just teenagers. Peter might have been the eldest because he was married, but this is exactly the kind of teenage boy
mhm.
conversations you'll have about, like, oh, Jesus loves me the most. No, Jesus, I'm the best Christian because I do X, Y,
I'm
Z.
the
Like,
favorite.
okay, all right, I'm the special boy.
And when Saul joins up after becoming Paul, they are hugely mistrustful of him. They all hate him. They don't want to.
They have a good reason.
They have a good reason to do so. But it's thanks to Barnabas that Saul kind of, well, Paul kind of gets a look in,
Hmm.
back in with the apostles. So,
So I'm going to give you a little insight into modern Christian culture these days. If one of us says to the other that you've got a fantastic Barnabas spirit or you're such a Barnabas, that's probably the highest compliment you're going to be able to get.
mm,
Even higher than, gosh, you really did stack a lot of chairs there. Because Barnabas is synonymous with encouragement,
mhm,
and it's something we want to be for each other. So,
yeah.
because Barnabas is able to see the potential in people when other people can
Mm.
can write them off.
I remember when I was doing research for this, I saw a thing where it's like you should have a Barnabas, a Paul, and a Simon in your life, or something like that. That was sort of like the 3 core people that you really want to have kind of around you. I'm not sure about the Paul one, but I don't know where that came from precisely. I'm suspicious of Paul. Okay, I'm dubious about Paul. I know he said nice things like love is patient, love is kind. Okay, that's nice, but
Yeah, we will.
he also told me I can't teach.
It's it.
So
We are going to have to spend some time unpacking that, and we will
we
get
really
to
are.
that. I have similarly complicated feelings with Paul. I think possibly people who are in power have decided to interpret him in a certain way in order to keep justifying their position of power.
Yeah. So even though the disciples bicker amongst themselves and they fight, at no point do they ever stop believing in Jesus or believing in
Mhm.
God. Again, it's down to power almost a little bit, that who's going to be the best of us, who's going to be at the top of the heap. So honestly, Uncle Ben was right that with great power comes great responsibility. The idea that power corrupts absolutely is, I feel we've more or less covered. But in the context of Andor, we can kind of see this quite clearly in the difference between how Luthen Rael and Mon Mothma go about the rebellion kind of business. Luthen has arguably become really detached actually from the core message of the rebellion, which is hope. His methods they're cunning, they're borderline barbaric. He'll assassinate and use his own soldiers as bait. He orchestrates the Aldani raid not purely for the money, but for the Empire's retaliation in the hopes that more rebels are going to get created.
It's that kind of, if you can make God bleed sort of thing. He wants to give the Empire a bloody nose just to show people that it can be done. And I love it because the stealing the money effectively creates the seed capital. If you imagine the Rebel Alliance as like a financial investment, that's where you kind of get the stash of cash to pay for your X-Wings and your Yavin Rebel base. It's brilliant.
So, when Mon Mothma tells him that people are going to suffer, he says that's the plan. In his own words, he uses the tools of his enemy in order to fulfill the goal of the rebellion, which is to spit in the face of God, essentially, to destroy the Empire any way that he can. But Mon Mothma, on the other hand, she's compassionate, she's smart, she uses her political power in the Senate to oppose the Empire, and only when that's physically no longer an option does she then move to Yavin and lead the rebels using those same democratic methods to maintain that hope of the rebellion. We really see a shift in how the rebellion changes from this alliance that we know and love from the original films, from this disparate, quite at times quite barbaric front of cells.
It's really interesting you mentioned democratic methods, because I feel like this is quite a live debate at the moment, because if we look over in America, we see that the Democrats have kind of become the rule of law party, which is ironic because often the Republicans like to present themselves as the law and order party. And we saw this with in Trump's first term as well. People are trying to take him down using the sort of standard political norms, and they just don't apply when you're dealing with fascists, because they will rip up the rule book and do whatever they need to do to maintain power. So you have to then end up using their own tactics against them. And I find this interesting. We saw this with a little bit with Luthen, where he's effectively does, I think he does the speech about planting a tree that you'll never sit in the shade of. I can't remember if he says that or if that's just a phrase that that exists.
It's one I've come across before. I mean, there's the line from Hamilton, which is talking about planting a garden that you'll never live to see. I'm sure there's a proverb or something similar.
And it's this sort of concept that in order for us to succeed as a society, we're going to need to do things where we won't necessarily directly benefit from it, but our children will, or our grandchildren, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. In the rebellion, neither side, Mon Mothma and Luthen never stopped believing that the Empire needs to be stopped, but how that belief is carried out is ultimately what kind of leads them on these very different paths. So I think we're going to team up maybe a little bit on this one, but I feel the juiciest question now is, when is it okay for Christians to rebel against the government? When can we get out our X-Wings?
You tell me what you've got, I'll tell you what I've got.
You can check my work, because this,
ladies first,
is probably what I took the most time kind of going through bits of the Bible for.
Go for it.
Unexpectedly, there's going to be some slightly competing views, at least possibly it might seem that way on the
Mhm.
surface. So Paul, Mr. Paul again, he starts us off strong in Romans 13 when he says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves." Pretty solid argument, kind of becomes foundational for the divine right of kings, which for those of you in British history classes, that's something that Charles I really doubles down on, and it goes really well for him when he gets his head chopped off after the English Civil War. Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount, but he says, "Do not resist an evil person. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles."
Mhm.
Which is something that that's heavily paraphrased, but it's something that we chatted about on a previous episode on The Chosen. But essentially, Jesus is talking about a law that allowed Roman soldiers to conscript civilians into carrying their gear for them for 1 mile. And this is also possibly where we get that phrase, "going the extra mile," which is just really fun for me. In that same sermon, he says to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. You know how I feel about Paul. But if Jesus is saying you've got to pay your taxes and turn the other cheek, then it sort of feels like you can't really argue with that. In the context of Star Wars, there are a few, obviously we're going to talk about the Empire, and there's plenty of persecution in the Empire. They're famously xenophobic. You'll notice that the rebels have plenty of non-humans in their ranks.
Mm.
The Empire in Andor has none. There is one notable exception with Commander Thrawn or Admiral Thrawn.
He's not in this show. We're not gonna worry about him.
The Empire doesn't is humans only.
I never even thought of that. That's
They're
yeah, of
they're not
course.
racist, but they're xenophobic.
Mhm.
So like, you know, it's like the monkey paw. Oh, I wish the Empire wasn't racist. Yep, cool, you got that. But they only employ humans.
Yes.
So that's something that we notice. Although it's not really covered in Andor, at this point in the timeline, Vader is still working on hunting down all the remaining Jedi and Force users he can find, and of course, the Death Star's being built.
Mhm.
There's plenty of people who aren't rebels that are being persecuted by this regime, and that's before you even get to the individual kind of corruption in local government on planet to planet, right?
Mhm.
So while God doesn't exist in the Star Wars universe, not really, it's hard to think of the identity, the Empire as being an authority reflective of God.
Mhm.
Obviously, in this instance, narratively, they are villains. They are made to be seen as villains. But I don't think any of us are praying for Director Krennic or Emperor Palpatine. It's not happening. But there is some good news if we take into account a story in Acts where the disciples are, told that they are forbidden from preaching about Jesus, and Peter and John kindly tell the Sanhedrin to get stuffed. They say, "Judge for yourselves whether it's right in God's sight to obey you rather than God. We must obey God rather than men." And later on, they are flogged for their continued preaching, but they take the consequence of breaking that unjust rule, and it's sort of described as they're sort of rejoicing in their suffering. They're kind of not actually that mad. They've been whipped, which brings me kind of back to the Romans passage that I quoted earlier. So, with a little bit of Peter kind of thrown in there as well. Peter tells us to submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men. Now, when we hear submit, we think that just means do whatever the law says, and that's that. But what Peter and Paul might be saying here is that when we choose to disobey the law of the authorities to instead obey the law of God, we must submit ourselves to the consequence of that disobedience, like Peter and John in Acts when they're whipped for their disobedience. And we're kind of seeing this at the moment. When we're recording this, we're maybe 2-3 weeks out from that massive spate of arrests. I think there were 400, 500 arrests of peaceful protests on Palestine, and a lot of them were priests. And you can see that they're having to be literally carried out. Essentially, they're not resisting arrest, but they're not going completely quietly.
So for our international listeners, I should probably explain some things. There's the sort of genocide happening in Gaza at the moment, being propagated by the Israeli state. There are some Israeli defense companies working in Britain, so effectively, there are some companies that are making weapons that will be used on civilians in Gaza as we speak. Palestine Action is what's called a direct action group, who, rather than just trying to protest and going through legal means, they're effectively saying to themselves, well, if I break into this factory and destroy these weapons, then that will stop a child in Gaza being killed. And that effectively means that for them it is worth getting locked up and arrested for that, to take the choice for that. What happened recently is that Palestine Action broke onto an RAF base on Brize Norton and spray painted a plane red, with red to represent their blood. They were arrested. I think they had to break the chain link fence to get in. And again, they were expecting to be arrested and prosecuted for the damage.
And no one was hurt, as far as I'm
No one
aware.
was hurt.
No one was hurt.
Well, I think that there was talk that security guards had been hurt in earlier attacks on these factories that we're talking about, but nobody's been killed, crucially, by Palestine Action. Yvette Cooper, she's been made Home Secretary, she made Palestine Action a prescribed group, meaning they are a terrorist group in the same way that Al-Qaeda and Hamas and several fascist organizations are.
I would
and therefore to even express any kind of support for Palestine Action will get you arrested. Now, it is very much a case of one of these things is not like the others. Palestine Action spray painted a plane, and Al-Qaeda made 9/11 happen. Those two things are not the same thing.
Yeah, I would point out that the Palestine Action Prescriber motion was put forward with Palestine Action, a neo-Nazi group, and a Russian imperialist group. So the members of parliament essentially had to prescribe all three of them at once, or none at all.
Yeah. So you then end up being in a case of, why are you, if you don't vote for it, it'll be like, why are you not prescribing a pro-Russian group? It's a really
it was a sticky situation for sure.
Yeah, it's a standard tactic that they've been doing. So one of the things that's been happening is that it's created quite a chilling effect. So, for example, I wanted to write about the mass arrests that the police are being forced to do because this new law has come through. And you're effectively arresting grandmothers and priests for holding up a sign. It doesn't strike me as the most effective use of police time, and the fact that if you need to make it illegal to be part of that group and they are attacking an RAF base, the RAF should be able to defend themselves from people with bolt cutters and spray paint cans. And it looks quite embarrassing if you need the government to make it illegal for anyone to even so much as hold a sign supporting you. Does that make sense?
It's madness. But like you say, a lot of priests were getting arrested, and sort of making it a little bit difficult. They weren't going to hold themselves, they had to get carried out, but they're not resisting, they're not, trying to get out of being arrested. But the Bible encourages us a few times to intervene in the law. So Peter, in the same passage as the one I've previously quoted, he says, for it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the talk of foolish men, which I love. Proverbs encourages us to intervene in really extreme cases when another person is being put to death unjustly or is otherwise in peril. It says, rescue those being led away to death, hold back those staggering towards slaughter. If you say, but we knew nothing about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone according to what they have done? Which does not he who weighs the heart perceive it is badass. It's a great line.
I love that you have favorite Bible lines.
Wow, look at me, man. This is It only took you like what 2, 3 years of this to
Favorite Bible lines developed by your own research,
yeah.
I heard to hasten to add.
So if we sort of look at these passages and a little bit of the earlier passages that we were looking at that seem to sort of say, no, do whatever the government says. Essentially, what the Bible seems to say, at least from my perspective, is that it's okay for a Christian to rebel against the government if their laws contradict God's laws, just as long as you can accept the consequences, the same way that the apostles did. Just because something is legal in law does not mean it's also legal by the laws of God.
Yeah, 100% agree.
And that's everything I have. So I'll leave it now to the expert in the Bible.
Again, you talk about the ideas of resistance there. I kind of wanted to point out how not all resistance is the same. And because it's a tricky issue, Christians have a long and complex relationship to the entire concept of resistance against a tyrannical government, mainly because our entire religion started out as a form of resistance against the tyrannical Roman Empire and the Sanhedrin, the Second Temple, Jewish elders of the day. So we're pretty comfortable with the idea of resisting government in some way, shape, or form. The problem is that while I may have a sense of kinship with like early Christians, because they believe what I believe, broadly speaking, and our goals are pretty much the same, there's a massive difference between myself and most of the members of that early church. Namely, that as a white, straight man, I'm part of the dominant group in this Western society. I'm not a Middle Eastern fisherman from a town with a really bad rep. So in many ways, this is the thing that might shock you. I'm not the primary audience for the Bible. There's a preacher and a writer called Zach Lambert, and the way he phrased it was he says, we're reading over the shoulders of first century Christians. And when you've got people like Paul and Luke and everybody writing to a oppressed group, you get a very strange thing happening when you get members of the dominant group reading it. Okay. This has led to what's been called Disney princess theology.
It sounds amazing. Tell me more.
So this was a term coined by Erna Kim Hackett. I think it's from a blog post. I couldn't find anything beyond the Reddit post, but I'll read out what she says. Secondly, white Christianity suffers from a bad case of Disney princess theology. As each individual reads scripture, they see themselves as the princess in every story. They are Esther, never Xerxes or Haman. They are Peter, but never Judas. They are the woman anointing Jesus, never the Pharisees. They're the Jews escaping slavery, never Egypt. For the citizens of the most powerful country in the world, who enslaved both native and black people, to see itself as Israel and not Egypt when it's studying scripture is a perfect example of Disney princess theology. And it means that as a people in power, they have no lens for locating themselves rightly in scripture or society. And it has made them blind and utterly ill-equipped to engage with issues of power and injustice. It's some very weak Bible work. All of this put together creates a profoundly broken theological framework. It explains why people love a photo of a cop hugging a black person, but dismiss claims of systemic racism in policing. It pretends that injustice is resolved when individuals hug. This was actually something that people were encouraged to do at Promise Keeper events in the 90s. Go find a black person and hug them. And it confuses white emotional catharsis with racial justice. The two are far, far, far from each other. BLM insists on addressing systemic issues, and white Christianity is pathologically individualistic. And since white Christianity is also characterized by a lack of humility, it is not prone to learn from people of color, who would be clearly the experts on the issues of racism in the church. And I loved that. I thought that really
No notes.
nailed it, because almost every sermon in every church service I've sat in has been wildly individualistic. It has been, how can you improve your walk with God? And it's never, how can we as a society address the societal injustices that are all around us right now? So this over-identification with oppressed minorities has meant that Christians have like no framework for how to act when they're actually the ones in power. Because do you ever hear that line, the first white man in the Bible was Pontius Pilate? Because that's him.
Yeah.
That's who we are, That's our guy to relate to. And the problem is, if you're so primed to resist, then the active resistance in itself becomes the virtue and not what you're resisting against.
Mm.
So you and I would probably agree that resisting against a creeping fascism and a creeping fascist regime that is trying to stifle free speech, resisting against that is good.
Yeah.
But I think you and I would probably agree that resisting against mask mandates was bad.
Yeah.
All churches were sort of forced to sort of stop having services during COVID at one point. And there was often murmurs and rumors about, oh, we're being oppressed and where they're trying to squash out our religion and it's the state overreaching and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, dude, the thing about prayer, one of the great things about prayer is you can do it remotely.
You can do it
You can do
anywhere.
it literally wherever you are. And you don't have to be in a crowded room full of people speaking very loudly and spluttering things everywhere. So this is that thing that the resistance became the point. If you think a lot of people, January 6th, they would have seen that as a form of resistance, despite the fact that their guy was the guy in power. So
Baffling. Truly baffling.
and then what happens, and we see this in the American church, and to an extent we're seeing it increasingly over here in Britain, we're seeing this need to resist against something be played out by resisting against movements that are represented sympathetically in the mainstream media. So you're seeing Christians resisting against the idea of trans inclusion into sort of society. And because they think that the resisting is the good thing, they don't realize that what they're doing is actually persecuting a tiny minority who are already massively at risk of prejudice, persecution, and in so many cases, violence. So when we need to think about resistance, what we need to think about is, what are we resisting against? And that, I think, is the most crucial, most important thing to ask ourselves before we choose to resist in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much wraps up our Finding the Faith in the Film.
Yeah. Giles, have you had a good time?
I have had such a good time.
You've had a rest.
Some other people have had a good time are James Pittard, Jonathan Wattis, Simon Sella, Miss Sarah Cooper, Philip Coleman, Lance Kane, and one Natalie Faye Miniker. We hope you guys have had a great time because you're our patrons
We
and we
love
love
you.
that you support us. So, ladies and gents, if you have been, thanks for listening. Our next episode will be The Good Place, where we'll be joined by an old friend of the podcast to tell us about all the philosophical implications. Until then, look after yourselves.
Bye-bye. God in Film is hosted and created by Giles Goff.
That's me.
Mixing and editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by
Julie Walsh.
And our theme tune was composed by
Rick Lee.
Waffle editing by
Natalie Miniker.
Please rate and review.
Please give us 5 stars because that's a nice thing to do.